An Anniversary to Remember by Dukakis. Chapter 1. An Anniversary to Remember. It is June 20th, 2001, Michael's and my 38th wedding anniversary. It is also the end of my 4th month of depression, my crisis period. I'm normally a person with enormous enthusiasm for and interest in the world. I am very involved with my 3 children. Every week I talk to John, Kara, and Andrea 3 to 4 times each. I normally call my dad, Harry Ellis Dixon, once or twice a day, and I go over to see him all the time. He lives so close. Michael and I have a very full social schedule. I'm involved with my sister, my friends, with life. I read 2 newspapers every day, the Boston Globe and the New York Times. I always have several books I'm reading. I am a social worker, and I try to help people who have problems, especially refugees. I always have 3 or 4 cases I'm working on. All that is just missing now. I look around at friends who are enjoying life and having fun. Fun and enjoyment are things I cannot even imagine. I don't speak to my kids on the phone or to my sister. Friends haven't heard from me in weeks. I do keep up with Dad, but he calls me more than I do him. I just went to a Boston Pops concert where he was conducting, but I was so totally uninterested and uninvolved that he expressed real concern to Michael. The last 2 people I want worrying about me are my father, who is too old and dear, and my husband, who has had to worry for far too long. I drag myself to work and miss a lot of it, staying home and doing a lot of sleeping. I don't want to go to dinner parties. When I do, I make Michael take me home early. I have run out of options and I don't want to drink. These are the times when I am most vulnerable. Having a drink is the only way of bringing me away from the horrendous feelings I am having about myself, my lack of interest in anything. It starts out as a glass or 2 of wine. It generally ends up with vodka, as much as a pint. The alcohol is like an amnesiac. It takes me away from the darkness. It certainly does not end the depression. I think I know how to control the drinking. John and the girls think otherwise. They imagine getting a phone call in the middle of the night after I have done something horrible to myself. But when I can't see any light in a very dark tunnel, a drink is the only thing I can think of to satisfy that overwhelming depression. Last night, I was so afraid I was going to drink. I was so shaky that I told Dr. Welch he had to check me in here at Massachusetts General Hospital. Today, I'm going to try the only thing left, electroconvulsive therapy. Corky Balzac, my friend and counselor, says she was the first to talk to me about ECT. That was nearly 5 years ago, and she recalls my saying, "Oh my God, no. Shock treatment. You were terrified by it." I have no recollection of that. What I do remember is being in the psych unit here at Massachusetts General for earlier drinking bouts and depression. Dr. John Matthews asked whether when I begin sliding into depression and increase my antidepressants, it never helps. I said, no. John knew my bouts of despair were getting worse and was worried where I was heading. He asked Michael and me if we had heard of ECT. He began to describe it and asked whether we would be willing to look at a film about it. We watched 2 of them, and the videos were very positive, very specific. That was more than 3 years ago. Jerry Rosenbaum, my psychopharmacologist, was death on ECT at that time. He didn't think it was the right treatment for me. I was so convinced that my therapist, Roger Weiss, would be equally negative that I never gave him a chance to tell me what he thought. Michael and I have our own reasons to be anxious. His older brother, Stelian Panos Dukakis, had it back in 1951 in what I think of as the treatment's dark ages, but they tell me he was its heyday. As Michael remembers, Stelian was a junior then at Bates and doing really well academically. He also was the best 2-miler in the state of Maine among college kids. He hadn't done a lot of dating, but had feelings for a gal who was a senior at Lewiston High at the time, an attractive and fun person. He had no sign ever of any mental illness. He was on his way back to Bates from a student government conference at Brown just after this girl broke things off with him. He was crushed. He called Michael's folks and said he wasn't feeling well and was coming home. He just fell apart psychologically. Michael's dad, a doctor, sent him to see a psychiatrist. Shortly after, Stelian tossed a pile of sleeping pills in his mouth, attempting to end his life or at least blot things out. Michael was at home and remembers finding Stelian on his bed, unable to be roused. Michael's dad and Stelian's psychiatrist decided he had to be hospitalized at a facility not far from Boston called Baldpate. They gave him ECT along with insulin coma treatments, which was a combination they often used at the time. Stelian was never really the same person. He put on weight, which was not like him, and there wasn't much effect there. There wasn't much communication. He had a zombie-like look, which melted the heart of everyone who knew and loved him. Michael remembers Stelian saying he never wanted to go through shock treatment again. My family, too, had experience with ECT, with a bit more upbeat outcome. Al Peters, my brother-in-law and close friend, got it more than 40 years ago at Bournewood, a psychiatric hospital near where we live in Brookline. Al was drinking then, and had some paranoid feelings. It was a time when the earliest antipsychotic drugs were being unveiled, and before they were widely available. ECT was the treatment of choice, the same way it had been a few years earlier with Stelian, and Al got 6 or 8 sessions. It erased everything fermenting in my mind. I couldn't remember anything 3 to 4 months prior to that, Al recalls, adding that the whole thing was stigmatizing enough that he never told anyone about it. Not until he heard I was considering it. At that point, he talked to Michael, making clear that while ECT robbed him of months of memories, it also helped clear his psychosis. I survived it, Al said. and it helped me. Both experiences were discomforting in different ways. What happened to Stelian wounded Michael so deeply that it was a long time before he could talk about it. The more so since his brother was killed 22 years later by a hit-and-run driver. I was glad he had ECT, but had suffered a loss of memory that would give anyone second thoughts about the procedure, at least the way it used to be done. Neither of us even knew they still were doing electroconvulsive therapy before John Matthews showed us the video and referred us to Dr. Charles Welch, the head of Mass General's ECT program. Charlie Welch is a very gentle soul. There are certain people in our lives who can really make a major difference, and Charlie is one of them. We were so impressed with him when we first saw. Charlie Welch told us 3 years ago that we had kept in the back of our heads what he told us about ECT, that it had an 80% success rate, but also probably would cause memory loss. We loved those odds and liked his honesty about possible side effects. Charlie also said I was the perfect patient for ECT, given the severity and stubbornness of my symptoms and the fact that none of the drugs I tried were getting me better. He looked me straight in the eye that day and said, "You're going to get better." I realized, as he told us later, that you and Mike already had dived off the cliff of desperation and were just hoping for a soft landing. Charlie was precisely the man to wipe clean for us the tarnished slate of electric shock from the days when Stelian and Al had it. We were ready to try it right then, but the day I was due to start, I came out of my depression and Michael checked me out of the hospital. We had gone as far as explaining all about the treatment to my dad, and he felt anything that was going to help was worth whatever risk there was. We knew that if the time came again when we were desperate for a solution, some kind of positive action, we would go back to Charlie and ECT. That time is now. Yesterday, they admitted me to the hospital under the name Jane D., a pseudonym they use as a courtesy to protect my privacy after my 12 years as First Lady of Massachusetts and Michael's long campaign for president in 1988. They gave me a very thorough physical to make sure my heart, lungs, and other organs could handle the procedure. Charlie also talked to Michael and me, as his medical notes reflect. On interview today, she appears severely depressed, although she is very skilled at concealing it, Charlie wrote. She has a gaunt facial expression, paucity of speech, speech latency, motor retardation, constriction of effect, and a hollow voice. Although I've seen her several times in the past, this is the most depressed I've seen her. The interview clearly is an effort for her. After extensive discussion, she, her husband, and I agreed that a trial of ECT is indicated. We also agreed that doing the first treatment on an inpatient basis would be advisable, given her inability to care for self and her self-destructive impulses regarding alcohol. It is our hope that after one treatment, she will have experienced enough incremental relief that we can complete the rest of the series of ECT on an outpatient basis. She will be admitted this afternoon and will commence ECT tomorrow morning. I know I am ready, but lying here waiting for Dr. Welch, the image of one flew over the cuckoo's nest flashes through my mind. I remember them pulling Jack Nicholson down and attaching him to the bed, then the convulsions where his body is just racked with shaking, violent spasms. And I remember how crazy he was afterward. He certainly didn't improve much, with violent headaches and all kinds of other very disturbing side effects. It is not an image that reassures. I am a social being, and I am concerned what people will think about what I am doing. Getting ECT makes you a full-fledged member of the mental health family. What am I doing? My daydream is interrupted when Charlie walks in. He has come to get me. We walk side by side down the hall quietly. Later, I sometimes ride in a wheelchair, but not with Charlie, not this first time. We take the elevator down to the treatment room, where they do all their ECT work. I'm nervous. Charlie can tell. Michael said goodbye last night and is teaching today. He's going to come in after my treatment to pick me up, assuming I'm well enough to go home. This is not the way either of us planned to spend our anniversary. Charlie and I reach the treatment area. Everything in the room, which they showed me before, looks new and different now. I look around. The ECT machine is over there and looks surprisingly simple, like an old-fashioned stereo system. The rest of the room is a lot like the one I just left on the ward. No restraints, burly attendants, or any of the other props I remember from the Nicholson movie. I am a first patient today. No one else is around. Charlie's ECT nurse greets us with the anesthesiologist I met last night, and they tell me what's going to happen. It seems cold. I'm not sure if it is me or the room, so the nurse puts a warm blanket on me. They clip to my finger a device that measures the oxygen in my blood. They stick a bunch of electrical leads on my legs, arms, and over my heart to make sure my heart is okay. They attach a blood pressure cuff to my arm, then insert a 4-line into the other arm. The anesthesiologist comes over and says, "I'm going to give you a shot of sodium pentothal. You'll be asleep within seconds." I'm lying down. He says to think of something bright and cheerful. I think about flowers and a field of daisies. I think about Michael and our anniversary. Chapter 2. It's back. It was the medical madness of an earlier era, a remedy forever equated with thrashing limbs and obliterated memories. Now, at the same Harvard teaching hospital where Kitty Dukakis gets her treatment, 20 patients a week volunteer for shock therapy. All are tormented by depression too deep to defy or another disabling disease of the mind. And all, like Kitty, are counting on 20 volts of electricity to jolt their brains back into equilibrium. Muscle relaxant ensures that the only signal of their seizure will be a twitch of the toe. Anesthesia guarantees that they will not remember the paralysis or anything else leading to the convulsion. Scores more line up for similar sessions at 24 other hospitals across the state. Even at nearby McLean, one of America's most exalted citadels of psychiatry, 50 patients a week are transfused with enough current to kindle a 60-watt bulb, and, if the procedure is true to its well-established form, vanquish the demons of the moment. In Massachusetts, as in the rest of the nation, the evidence is unmistakable. ECT is back. A procedure pioneered in the 1930s that seemed on the edge of tie-in just a generation ago is being performed today at medical centers large and small, on patients staying in the hospital, and on a growing number who simply show up an hour before treatment and leave an hour after. More than 100,000 Americans a year get ECT for ailments ranging from mania to catatonia, with 10 to 20 times that many worldwide. Electroconvulsive therapy is now as ordinary as a hysterectomy and twice as common as knee replacement surgery. And it all is happening just enough out of sight that it has taken many medical professionals by surprise. Madness no more. Electric shock is quietly being resurrected as a restorative wonder that someday could rank right up there with penicillin and Prozac. How one of the most reviled psychiatric procedures is fast becoming one of its mainstays is an astounding yet untold chapter of American medical history. It is a narrative that begins with an epidemic of mental illness that has stubbornly resisted a cure and a handful of doctors who have equally stubbornly refused to give up on a remedy that most had banished as barbaric. Researchers still have not filled in the puzzle of how or why ECT provides relief, although the proof is compelling that it does, faster and more surely than drugs or talk therapy. Questions also remain about the price shock patients pay and memories lost, in rare cases permanently, and whether such risks can be minimized or eliminated entirely. The rise, fall, and rise again of ECT thus remains an epic without an ending, as practitioners and potential patients alike wait to see if hopes for success are sustained and it can come back all the way. Barbara Collins-Layton could not wait. Like millions of Americans, the 56-year-old retired banker suffers serious depression and has since childhood. It is a family trait, as is the mania that comes after. Her bathroom vanity was beginning to look like a pharmacy, stocked with Risperdal, Zyprexa, Lamictal, and other psychotropic drugs that once worked but did no longer. Her desk was cluttered with crumpled bills from therapists. It had gotten to where she would wake in the morning and make a beeline for the living room in her rocking chair. Forward and back, lean and tilt, all day long for 6 long weeks. While she rocked, her 3-year-old adopted son whispered, "Did I make mommy sick?" Collins-Layton finally went to her psychiatrist and pleaded, "I can't do this any longer. I can't live in this state of mind." He suggested ECT. Looking back 6 years later, Collins-Layton realizes how radical a treatment ECT is. "Was I afraid to get electricity to my brain?" she asks. Hell yes. She remembers what smelled like, almost like metal, her first session. She knows there are questions still unanswered, like whether her lost memories will return. "But it made me function again," Collins-Layton explains from her home in Portage, Indiana. "You don't function sitting in a rocking chair. I didn't shower. I couldn't cook. I couldn't take care of my family. It takes a while with ECT. I had like 6 treatments. But when I came home from the hospital, I was functioning again. ECT gave me my life back." One thing ECT is not as photogenic. The typical patient looks as grisly as she feels. She has had nothing to drink in 2 hours, nothing to eat in 8. No hairpins allowed, or jewelry. No hairspray, mousse, eyeglasses, contact lenses, hearing aids, dentures, or anything else that could short-circuit the electrodes or burn the patient. Chewing gum is verboten. So is nail polish, at least on the fingers or toes where doctors will watch for signs of seizure. There is little sense of self-command as she is rolled in a wheelchair and lies in wait on a stretcher. Chances are she has come from a locked ward where she has had too much time to ruminate on the impending procedure or, worse still, been briefed by the frazzled soul in the next room. "I'm sitting in the waiting area, and other people there for treatment are watching TV," remembers Barbara, a 66-year-old nun who had a dozen sessions of ECT several years ago at a suburban hospital. She had neither read about the treatment nor seen it in the movies. No one in her closed world of the convent had had it. Nothing had prepared her for the despair. The nurse comes down and calls the names of 5 people. Then she calls my name. "I nearly died," says Sister Barbara. "People I was going up in the elevator with looked so sick. So sick, I said to myself, I'm depressed, but not that sick. There's a way their body operates. Someone who walks relatively stiffly, their arms down by their side. They know where they are, on the elevator, but beyond that they don't really know." ECT's setting does not help. Ordinarily, the procedure is done in the post-anesthesia care unit, or PACU, just as the hospital is waking up. Those choices are logical. The PACU has the required curtained cubicle dividers, movable stretchers, highly trained nurses, and medical monitors, and since regular surgeries have barely begun, it's 7 a.m., the recovery unit will be empty for the next hour or two. But the where and when of ECT can also be stigmatizing. Most ECT units are in a secluded section of the hospital, sometimes in the basement. Stainless steel is everywhere. Fluorescent lights. The feel and smell of antiseptics. No soothing paintings here. No racks of magazines or wall-mounted television set. No comfortable chairs standard in obstetrics, gynecology, and other departments where today's spin-savvy hospitals market and define themselves. The remote location does shield patients from running into anyone they know. Even better, it makes it unlikely that other patients, staff, or the public will find out that ECT is being done there. Those odds of anonymity are enhanced by scheduling the procedure at a time when most patients and physicians are still eating breakfast. The treatment cubicle itself is occupied by a medley of wires and electrodes, along with a medical team that vaults into action the instant a patient arrives, a reminder of how many more are waiting and how soon the room will revert to its intended use for surgical recoveries. A nurse takes vital signs. The ECT doc fastens sensors to the stomach, head, limbs, and finger, up to 11 in all. Green, brown, black, red, and white hues tell him which wires go to the machine monitoring heart rate and rhythm, which connect to devices checking brain waves and oxygen levels in the blood. The anesthesiologist inserts a needle in the vein and attaches an intravenous line, standard practice for any procedure requiring anesthesia. What happens next is aimed at shielding the body from the shock delivered to the brain. A short-acting sleeping medication is injected, and 30 seconds later the patient is out cold. A muscle relaxant is added, producing near-complete paralysis and guarding against the writhing and flailing of the treatment's bad old days. The anesthetic drugs leave the patient unable to breathe on her own, so she is hooked to a supply of pure oxygen that breathes for her and protects her brain. The anesthesiologist inserts a plastic bite block or cotton cushion in the patient's mouth to keep her from biting her tongue or cracking a tooth, a safeguard that works even better when a doctor or nurse grasps her chin just before the pulse is delivered. Final preparations: parting the hair, cleaning the scalp with rubbing alcohol where 2 half-dollar-sized metal electrodes will go, then applying a conductive gel that makes it easier for the current to make contact with the cranium. Electricity comes from a wall plug, activates with a push of a button, and is the centerpiece of everything that makes ECT spellbinding as well as odious. A device that looks like a stereo receiver transforms the current into a waveform intended to be safe and therapeutic. A wire and a pair of 6-inch electrodes the shape of thread spools connect the ECT machine to the patient's head. The right dose is critical, and most doctors still use a formula based on a patient's age. Older means more. Sex. Men need more. Other medications, some impede a convulsion, and how oily the skin and thick the skull are, thicker and oilier call for a higher dose. The energy actually delivered to the brain is less than 1 amp, or a third of what comes from a cardiac defibrillator and a fraction of the 7 amps needed to power a vacuum cleaner. The aim of that jolt, the holy grail of ECT, is to stimulate a seizure powerful enough to fire off the cells of the brain in rhythmic synchrony. Think of all the light bulbs in Manhattan flicking on and off at the same time, several times a second. Or imagine what happens with epilepsy. Only there the convulsion is violent, while with electroshock, anesthesia, and muscle relaxants ensure the patient is almost motionless. The ECT device shoots its current for at most 8 seconds, and often just half a second. So quick it is impossible to track on a watch, and so quiet an untrained observer would not know anything was happening if not for 3 beeps from the machine beforehand. The seizure itself is over in as few as 15 seconds, and seldom lasts longer than 60. The patient's jaw may tighten and her face flush slightly when the stimulus is applied, and during the seizure, there's a twitch of the toes or fingers. Corroboration of a grand mal seizure comes from 3 sources: an electrocardiogram that shows a spike in heart rate, an electroencephalogram that reveals changes in the brain's electrical activity, and a blood pressure cuff that reflects an increase in pressure. The whole routine, from the time a patient counts herself to sleep to when she is moved to the recovery bay, normally takes less than 15 minutes and is often over in 5. That is a good thing, since the process is likely to be repeated 6 to 12 times in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And if that series works, even more shock may be given to prevent symptoms from coming back or battle them when they do. For Rhoda Falk, the ECT treatments she had in the 1940s and again in the 1960s were painless and successful, but invasive enough that she would never do it again. A procedure like that is like having a cataract operation. When you're older, anything drastic like that you shy away from, says Falk, who is 81 and lives in Prescott, Arizona. But 58-year-old Laurel Zangerl, who had her first ECT 10 years ago, says that with muscle relaxants and anesthesia, you might have a headache after or feel a little groggy, but you don't feel horrible or shocked or anything like that. It's not a wonderfully pleasant experience, but I would rather have ECT than have a tooth pulled by a dentist or a crown replaced. And it definitely is better than root canal. Researchers have assembled a clear profile of today's ECT patient, and she looks a lot like Geraldine Knock. She is the first defining characteristic. More than 2 out of 3 ECT patients are women, a trend that holds whether the treatment is being given in Finland or England, New Zealand, or, in Knock's case, Neenah, Wisconsin. The gender difference is not surprising, since nearly twice as many women as men are diagnosed with depression, and depression is the most common condition for which ECT is prescribed. But research also suggests that, for reasons no one has pinned down, doctors may be quicker to prescribe ECT to female patients, who in turn may be quicker to agree. Knox age, 68, is another giveaway. One national survey showed that more than a third of hospitalized ECT patients are over 65, quadruple their share of the population of psychiatric patients. A poll of New York hospitals found that more than half of ECT recipients were older than 60. Why the yawning age gap? It is partly that senior citizens suffer more major depression than other age groups, especially if they live in a nursing home, and suicide is much more common among older Americans. Potential interactions with drugs they are taking for medical maladies put the elderly at risk with antidepressants, making them more likely to turn quickly to an alternative like ECT. And an aging population means more Americans meeting those criteria. Insurance plays a role, too, with Medicare helping the elderly afford electroconvulsive treatment, a single session of which adds about $3,000 to a hospital stay and costs up to $2,000 as an outpatient procedure. A full series involving 6 to 12 treatments costs between $12,000 and $36,000. ECT critics say seniors are easily coerced into having the treatment, but more convincing is evidence that it works even better for older patients. The National Institutes of Health has concluded that, even with their high use relative to other age groups, for the elderly, ECT is generally underused or unavailable. The typical ECT patient also is white, rich, and a Yankee. Few African Americans and Hispanics get it, although no one is sure whether that is because of income, race, or something else. Money is easier to explain. It buys the insurance that pays for ECT or lets a patient pay out of pocket and increases the odds that she will seek treatment for her mental illness. She is more likely to seek that treatment at a private hospital than a government-supported one, to live in an area with lots of psychiatrists and not many legal restrictions on ECT, and to be from the Northeast or Midwest. All of which describes knock, but belies the public perception of ECT left over from the 1950s and 1960s, when the treatment was rightfully criticized as being used disproportionately on poor wards of state mental asylums. Today, there's an opposite, equally troubling concern, that the poor are denied ECT. People without private insurance used to be able to get ECT at state hospitals. But since being branded shock factories in the 1960s and 1970s, few public facilities are willing to bear the stigma or cost of the treatment. 80% of state hospitals across the South failed to administer a single ECT in 1986, and it was not even an option of the 19 state hospitals built since 1970, according to a survey published in 1989. The situation probably has worsened since then, with the ranks of the uninsured swelling and public hospitals across the country still wary about electroshock. In Manhattan, for instance, ECT is available at New York University Medical School's upscale Tisch Hospital, but not at the NYU-affiliated Bellevue Hospital, which is city-owned and caters to a poorer population. The reason, says Dr. Jonathan Brody, interim chairman of psychiatry at NYU, is grounded only in ignorance and history. Policies at public hospitals are decided by lay boards of directors who chased ECT out of the public domain. They decided this was a barbaric treatment, and now public institutions no longer do it. It means that poor people are denied wonderful care. ECT is a wonderful treatment when it is used appropriately.